What happens when a country dismantles its own engine? When the people who pick our food, build our homes, and care for our elders are gone, the consequences ripple outwards. Fields go unharvested, construction halts, and essential services vanish. In towns where jobs disappeared long ago, what do you tell those left behind? This is not a distant warning. It's happening now, and most of us don't even see it. America's foundation is built on the labor of immigrants, often undocumented, who do the work that keeps our country running. We depend on them for our food, our care, and our economy, but now we are deporting them, and the consequences are devastating. At the same time, millions face hunger as support is threatened. We are dismantling our essential workforce and punishing the vulnerable, creating a perfect storm for collapse. Our modern American life, with its overflowing grocery stores and affordable food, is not a miracle of automation. It's a miracle of human hands. Immigrant labor forms the essential, load-bearing walls of our agriculture, construction, food service, and elder care. They are the people who show up at dawn and leave after dusk, doing the jobs that are often invisible but absolutely critical. Yet we are targeting this workforce for removal, dismantling the very engine that keeps our country fed and functioning. The idea that undocumented workers drain the economy is a myth. In reality, they pay billions in taxes, funding schools, roads, and Social Security, benefits they'll never receive. When states crack down, like Georgia did, crops rot, farmers lose millions, and communities suffer. These workers are vital, irreplaceable contributors. Expelling them isn't saving money, it's self-inflicted harm. The idea that Americans will take these jobs if immigrants leave sounds logical, patriotic even. But it's a fantasy that ignores reality. The work is punishing. 10-hour days in brutal heat, repetitive motions, and pay by the piece. When states tried to replace immigrant labor, most recruits quit within hours. The same story plays out in construction and other industries. The result? Rotting food, stalled projects, and rising prices. This is the cost of forgetting who our systems rely on. The shrinking workforce isn't just an economic theory. It's a crisis you can see in empty fields and wasted crops. In states with aggressive deportation policies, the backbone of American agriculture is collapsing. Ripe produce rots because there's no one left to pick it. Farmers plead for help, but their warnings are drowned out by politics. This is the great unpicking, a deliberate unraveling of a system that once kept the nation fed. From Midwest meatpacking plants to Pacific Northwest orchards, every sector is feeling the strain. Each deportation is a tear in our food supply chain, and the logic is simple. Remove the workers, and the work stops. Shuttered diners, half-built homes, and abandoned fields are all evidence of policies that ignore economic reality. We're choosing shortages and dismantling our own capacity to produce, all for an immigration policy detached from the country's needs. Some claim U.S.-born citizens will fill the labor gap, but reality says otherwise. After Georgia's 2011 immigration law, attempts to replace migrant workers with domestic labor failed spectacularly. Most quit within days. This isn't about laziness. These jobs are grueling, low-paid, and unstable, requiring skills built over years. States across the country have tried and failed to recruit Americans for these roles. The attrition rate is sky-high, and the myth that we can simply swap workers is pure fantasy. We've built our economy on a vulnerable immigrant workforce, and removing it collapses the foundation. U.S.-born workers expect better wages and conditions, and rightly so. The hard truth: we depend on this workforce, and there's no plan to replace it. Labor shortages don't just hurt farms, they hit your wallet. When crops go unpicked, supply drops and prices soar, especially for produce like berries and greens. These aren't minor bumps. Some prices have jumped 40–60% due to labor shortages. Working-class families feel it most, forced to choose between healthy food and cheaper alternatives. The squeeze extends to meatpacking, construction, and restaurants, raising costs across the board. Ironically, the same policies claiming to help families are driving up their cost of living. The rising grocery bill is a hidden tax from a broken immigration system. We're making life more expensive for ourselves, all while starving the states of essential workers. Rising prices hit hardest in communities already struggling, fueling the spread of food deserts. As supply chains falter, supermarkets pull out of low-income areas, leaving only fast food and convenience stores. For many, fresh food becomes a distant luxury, especially for those without transportation. Labor shortages on distant farms lead directly to malnutrition in forgotten towns. Diets shift to cheap, processed foods, driving up rates of obesity and chronic illness. Children suffer, schools struggle, and healthcare costs rise. Deporting farm workers doesn't just hurt the economy, it deepens inequality and public health crises. Food deserts are expanding, turning access to real food into a privilege, not a right. As we dismantle our essential workforce, a harsher logic emerges: no job, no food. New proposals tie food aid like SNAP to strict work requirements, ignoring the reality of vanishing jobs. In many towns, stable work simply doesn't exist, and transportation is a barrier. These policies punish the poor for systemic failures: wage stagnation, high childcare costs, and unaffordable housing. We blame individuals for poverty while making it harder to escape. The result: impossible choices for families and hunger as a penalty for circumstances beyond their control. This isn't a path to prosperity, it's a strategy for punishment. We're legislating hunger, not solving poverty. SNAP, America's most effective anti-poverty program, is under attack. New rules would impose rigid work requirements and complex paperwork, cutting off help for those who need it most. Over 34 million Americans face food insecurity, including children, veterans, and the disabled. SNAP isn't a luxury, it's the difference between eating and going hungry. Most recipients who can work already do, often in low-wage, unstable jobs. Making SNAP harder to access destabilizes lives and undermines the working poor. We're not encouraging work, we're making survival harder. Attacking SNAP threatens the health and stability of millions, all under the guise of reform. When we talk about policies that punish the poor, we often picture a stereotype. But the reality is far more complex and heartbreaking. Veterans, seniors, and children are the forgotten casualties, struggling with hunger, disability, and poverty. Children especially are silent victims, going to bed hungry when their parents lose benefits. These policies ignore the reality of disability and hardship. It is a quiet cruelty, hidden in the fine print of legislative text. When you combine the deportation of our essential workforce with the punishment of our most vulnerable citizens, you get a chilling synergy. These are not two separate crises. They are two fronts in the same war. On one hand, we are creating labor shortages that drive up the cost of food. On the other, we are taking away the assistance that poor families use to buy that increasingly expensive food. It is a perfect storm of economic hardship, a pincer movement that squeezes the poor from both sides. We make food more expensive and then blame people for being unable to afford it. This is not a policy designed to make the poor work. It is a policy designed to make the poor vanish. By cutting off access to food, housing, and healthcare, we are making life for those at the bottom so untenable that they are pushed further into the shadows. They become invisible. They disappear from public life, from official statistics, and from our collective conscience. They are forced into desperation, into unstable housing, and into a state of perpetual crisis that is hidden from the view of mainstream society. The goal is not to solve poverty, but to hide it. Consider the towns where this is happening. These are often communities already hollowed out by deindustrialization and economic decline. The jobs have left, but the people remain. Now, we are telling them that because there are no jobs, they are also not entitled to food. This creates an impossible situation that can only lead to further decay. It accelerates the decline of rural towns and inner-city neighborhoods, fostering desperation and eroding the social fabric. We are not just punishing individuals, we are condemning entire communities to a slow and painful death, all because they lack the economic vitality that our broader economy has stripped from them. Ultimately, this is a crisis of values. A nation that tells it's hungry, no job, no food, in places where there are no jobs, is a nation that has lost its moral compass. It is a society that has decided to balance its books on the backs of its most defenseless members. We are treating poverty not as a societal problem to be solved, but as a personal failing to be punished. These policies are the architecture of a crueler, more brittle America, one where the social contract has been shredded. We are starving the states not just of workers and resources, but of their very humanity. Here's the central paradox. The states pushing hardest for mass deportations and welfare cuts are the ones most dependent on immigrant labor and federal aid. It's a political irony. These states are sawing off the very branch they're sitting on. When you look at the maps, the overlap is stunning. The economies here are deeply tied to the very people and programs they seek to expel. It's a slow-motion act of economic self-harm, applauded by those who will pay the price. Florida and Alabama passed strict immigration laws targeting the very workers their economies depend on. Farms and construction sites emptied, projects stalled, and costs soared. Politicians celebrated, but local businesses and families paid the price. They burned the bridge to their own recovery, standing right in the middle, promising the fire would only hurt someone else. The unavoidable truth is that this contradiction cannot last forever. A state can't simultaneously rely on a system and work to destroy it. This is a collision course with reality, and the impact will be felt most acutely in the red states that have pursued this path most aggressively. The first consequence is the erosion of their primary industries. As immigrant labor becomes scarcer and more expensive, agricultural and construction businesses will face a choice: automate at a massive cost, relocate to more stable labor markets, or simply go out of business. This will hollow out the rural economies that are the political bedrock of these states. Secondly, the strain on the population will become unbearable. As we've seen, these policies drive up the cost of living, particularly for food and housing. At the same time, cutting access to programs like SNAP means that families have fewer resources to cope with these rising costs. This creates a pressure cooker of economic distress. You can't tell a population that they must be self-reliant while systematically removing the jobs and the safety nets that make self-reliance possible. The result will be rising poverty, worsening public health outcomes, and a growing sense of desperation and anger among the very voters who were promised a better future. This leads to the third and perhaps most dangerous consequence: a crisis of governance. As local economies falter and social problems mount, state governments will face shrinking tax revenues and increasing demand for emergency services. The very states that pride themselves on fiscal conservatism will find themselves in a fiscal crisis of their own making. They'll have fewer resources to fund schools, maintain roads, or operate hospitals, all while their populations become poorer and sicker. The ideological victory of passing these laws will be a Pyrrhic one, leaving behind a state that is weaker, poorer, and harder to govern. Ultimately, reality does not care about your political party. An unpicked crop rots the same way in a red state as it does in a blue state. A hungry child suffers the same, regardless of how their parents voted. The economic laws of supply and demand are not suspended for partisan convenience. These states have embarked on a massive high-stakes gamble, betting that they can defy economic gravity through sheer political will. But gravity always wins. The repercussions are coming, and they will land hardest on the people and places that were promised protection, not ruin. The economic crisis doesn't stay in rural counties, it spreads like a contagion. A farmer's rotting crops are just the beginning. Scarcity drives up prices for everyone, not just for strawberries and lettuce, but for the basic cost of staying alive. Inflation rises, wages lag behind, and families everywhere feel the squeeze. The most vulnerable are hit hardest, forced to make impossible choices, skip meals, and rely on food banks. The blast radius covers the nation, but its epicenter is the dinner tables of the poor. Rural America faces a crisis. As essential services collapse, entire communities are left behind. Hospitals close, jobs vanish, and the nearest emergency care can be hours away, a deadly risk for many. Schools, police, and fire departments struggle to survive. The very fabric of rural life unravels, leaving ghost towns and broken promises. This is not just hardship, it's the erasure of a way of life. The collapse of rural towns isn't just a local problem, it's a national crisis. Our country is an interconnected ecosystem. When rural America falters, cities feel the shockwaves, supply chains break, prices rise, and migration strains urban life. The problems of the country do not stay in the country. This ripple effect is economic, social, and political, weakening trust, fueling division, and making us all poorer, sicker, and less secure. We have seen the wreckage. rotting crops, collapsing towns, and families facing impossible choices. But this is not the end. We stand at a crossroads. The policies that brought us here were choices. We can choose differently. Solutions exist: comprehensive immigration reform, support for working families, and food assistance. One path leads to decline, the other to a more stable, humane future. The choice is ours. Real change starts in our own communities, not just in Washington, D.C. By supporting local food systems, small farms, and community initiatives, we build resilience and keep our economy strong. Investing in workforce training, childcare, and elder care creates jobs and opportunity. Rebuilding from the ground up means fostering local strength and shared prosperity. It's hard work, but it's the only way to build a lasting foundation. Ultimately, this is not just a crisis of policy. It is a crisis of conscience. The numbers, the statistics, and the economic charts all tell a story of systemic failure. But at its heart, this is a moral challenge. It forces us to ask fundamental questions about who we are as a nation and what we owe to one another. Do we want to be a country that lets food rot in the fields while children go hungry? Do we want to be a society that relies on the labor of a vulnerable workforce while simultaneously demonizing them and threatening their families? Do we want to punish people for being poor, old, or sick? The answer to these questions cannot be found in a political party platform or a cable news soundbite. It is found in our shared sense of decency. It is up to us, every voter, every neighbor, every consumer, every voice, to decide that the current path is unacceptable. This requires us to look past the divisive rhetoric that pits urban against rural, native-born against immigrant, and taxpayer against benefit recipient. It requires us to see that our fates are intertwined. The security of the farmer is our security. The well-being of the food service worker is our well-being. The dignity afforded to the poorest among us is the true measure of our society's greatness. This means demanding more from our leaders. It means voting for people who offer credible solutions, not just empty slogans. It means holding them accountable not for their tough talk, but for the real-world consequences of their policies on our communities. It means using our voices to speak up for those who have been silenced: the farm worker, the single mother, the veteran struggling to get by. Change does not happen because it is inevitable. It happens because people decide to make it happen. It starts when we reject the politics of cruelty and fear in favor of the politics of pragmatism and compassion. This is America's wake-up call. The crumbling foundation, the rising prices, the growing desperation. These are the alarms ringing, warning us that the house is on fire. We can choose to ignore them, to argue about who started the fire while the flames grow higher. Or we can choose to work together, grab a bucket, and start putting it out. This is a crisis of values, and the choice we make will define our nation for generations to come. Who do we want to be? The time to answer that question is now. We've seen the fields of wasted food, shuttered businesses, and empty hospitals, consequences of policies that attack our own foundations. You can blame immigrants, demonize the poor, and ignore economic facts, but you can't escape the results. The bill always comes due: higher grocery prices, closed diners, longer ER waits. This isn't a partisan problem. It's an American one. When we forget we're all connected, everyone pays the price. This is not a eulogy for America. It is a wake-up call. The damage is severe but not yet irreversible. The path we are on is a choice. The solutions are practical and within our grasp. Change starts with us. When we demand real solutions, not scapegoats, we cannot escape the consequences. The alarm has been ringing for years. This is America's wake-up call. The future is not yet written. The time to begin is now.